Good evening, afternoon, and/or morning, folks. This is another episode of Fuck me, Rendezvous with Rico. And tonight I have with me a dear friend, Connor Kelly, the host of the Progressive American. Connor, it's been a while, so would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name's Connor Kelly. I am, like Rico said, the host of the Progressive American podcast, newsletter, and YouTube. I do a lot of interviews like Rico does as well. I do video essays, response videos. I was a former staffer for Elizabeth Warren, and I tend to describe myself as a social democrat with liberal tendencies.
All right, I could dig that. Fucking, I know you've been rocking off some interviews yourself. And if there's any advice I can give, it's that a lot of people will just kind of leave you on red.
Yes. Yeah, that does happen. I've also been somewhat guilty of that on the front of people requesting to come on the show, either because I was burnt out or just overwhelmed or not sure what I was gonna say, and that happens.
Yeah.
But I think it's really kind of nice to see that kind of interview circuit. That it involves discussion. Like, for example, I was really a big fan and still am of the Twitch streamer Aristocracy. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I actually interviewed her in an article on my newsletter on my Substack.
Oh fuck yeah! And speaking of aristocracy, I've got her. I haven't scheduled it yet, like on the show, like made the YouTube and all that jazz, because I've been lazy and I'm sorry, but she's coming on the show too.
Oh, wonderful! I love that.
Hell yeah! I'm looking forward to talking to her. Fucking, I don't know about what yet, but I'll make it up as I go, same as always.
Of course. So
Do
I
you remember?
wanted to. Oh,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead, brother.
So the reason I wanted to talk to you, and this has been something that's been bugging me ever since we've been hearing a lot about Ron DeSantis. And
Mhm.
recently it came into the news that one of the curriculum guidelines that his Department of Education has been setting up is a clarification. The document says, I have it actually right here, which says, "quote Instruction includes how slaves develop skills which, in some cases, could be applied for their personal benefit." And that has sparked a lot of controversy for a variety of reasons, mostly because it seems to ignore how those skills and their labor was extracted. And I kind of wanted to go into a little bit about how this is a pattern, not just with Ron DeSantis, but with the right's refusal to acknowledge the severity of slavery and also just an unwillingness to allow academic independence to really provide a more critical view of our past.
I can only wonder one thing is like, why is this even a hill worth dying on to y'all? Like the idea that there was some benefit to slavery. Why would y'all even if I just don't get it. That's such a like, never mind the merits of the position. Why would you even publicly come out saying that? Like, golly, like shut the fuck up.
It, it,
Oh
it
my
definitely
god.
it definitely provokes that reaction, but I think part of the problem we have with really as a society is that in America we do have an almost glorified view of our sense of self, and that we were always going to be correct. We would like to believe that justice will always prevail, and when there's signs that that was not always the case, or when the severity of our wrongdoings are more extreme than we initially imagined, it's hard for really the public to kind of come to terms with this, and that's why you see this backlash against things like the 1619 project, which I wrote about some of the problems with that project. But you've got people like Ron DeSantis who banned that project being used in schools in any way. And instead of critically examining how there were some mistakes in that project, like the claim that the possibility of the abolition of slavery caused, the American Revolution,
Yeah.
they took it as an indoctrination program, and they quoted historians who were critical of the project while also ignoring that those historians said it was a flawed but necessary rectification of our historical record.
Nah, they got what they wanted from those historians. The rest is irrelevant.
Yes, right. And the other thing I think is really frustrating with that particular quote is that there are people such as Ben Shapiro who basically argued that this is an accurate statement. It's not saying that they were benefiting during slavery, but that they were able to determine their own place after slavery. And aside from the fact that this thing does not clarify that explicitly at all, that seems to really ignore what fundamentally is how do I say this? A complete disregard for context, to put it lightly. One of the things that really doesn't get talked about enough is what happened to enslaved people after the 13th Amendment was ratified. And that really does get particularly nasty, because you get into failures to adequately support them through their socioeconomic status, or maintain the Freedmen's Bureau to help support them when it comes to their ability to vote. But also what doesn't get mentioned a lot is the role of sharecropping, which a lot of African Americans just couldn't go anywhere because they had no support or place to go. And that statement in that document really would not help us understand how they were still exploited even after they were liberated.
Yeah, that's, if there's one thing I understand is, and it's not just that, it's not simply that nothing was done, it's that every attempt to do something was fucking stamped out. And I mean every single fucking attempt. From the what's this fucking name? The black baseball player.
Jackie Robinson?
Jackie Robinson's fucking national bank he created. He and some other people had created that went under. Fucking to try to rectify the housing crisis in the black community and all that, and get kind of build wealth for black people. I mean, there's the Tulsa race massacre, and the fucking list goes on. Every attempt to ameliorate the suffering of black people in America has been shot down, and that's the thing that always trips these guys up, conservatives and the like up when I bring this up to them, because they love to talk and act, and they want the history taught that basically everything's fine, things weren't as bad as the libs say they were, this, that, and the third. But then you ask them, it was like you point out the disparities, and then you ask them, what have we actually done to fix these disparities? Can y'all name anything? And they either go silent or they'll be like, welfare. And I'm like, bro, the welfare definitely helped, but that's not if that's the only thing you can think of, then that's kind of the fucking problem here.
Yeah, and just to kind of get into Ron DeSantis' response particularly, he claims he wasn't responsible for that particular added thing, but he has not gone out of his way to say that it is a flawed approach. In fact, he's actively said that people who are criticizing him, like Tim Scott, are doing the bidding of Kamala Harris. No, and it's really one of those things where he is inserting a reaction against us understanding our history and our politics in context with a partisan reaction, and that's not helpful at all, because this is something that keeps happening among the right. They really seem to believe that these institutions of academia are indoctrinating people, and not that there's this historiographic debate.
They sincerely believe that, like with their whole fucking chest. They really believe that there's some indoctrination. That's why they've been going after public schools so much, like now cranked up to 11. They really believe that shit, man.
Oh, and that's the other thing. It's the conspiracism too. Like they will say things like, I remember, I believe it was James Lindsay. He was interviewed by somebody who I'll probably mention in passing in later. And he invoked the idea of cultural Marxism. And there's this intense idea that Marxists are infiltrating schools and academia and are indoctrinating people to adopt a Marxist understanding, to hate America or whatever. But the thing is, like, if you look at, say, the 1619 Project, one of the introductory essays by Nicole Hannah Jones literally talks about how she came to understand how her father was still proud of being an American despite some of the ways in which he was abused by the American society at large. And that thing to me is something that really is not only frustrating, but it's infuriating. There are ways to look at our past and all its negativity and be able to say, oh, here's why we're proud of being American in spite of these things. But you can't have that conversation if they're not willing to first acknowledge the horror that like motivated that.
Yeah, and I still don't quite understand why they can't just reckon with how bad things were. Like, I don't understand it. Maybe it's because of the way they're taught about how things were. I don't know. But I really, truly can't understand the absolute, I'm gonna say, sorry, I lost my train of thought, basically. It's just, long story short, I don't get them. I maybe you can explain it better than I, but I don't get them. It's really like it shouldn't be controversial to say slavery was unequivocally a bad thing, right? That shouldn't even be up for debate. It shouldn't be something that's hard for them to say that slavery was unequivocally bad in all cases, in every circumstance, in every way, shape, and form. There is no debating that, right? But no, they can't fucking help themselves somehow, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, and I will say there's a couple of reasons. The first reason I would say is it was only relatively recently that we actually began to see legitimate academic and public challenges to the ideas of the lost cause in the 1960s. And for the longest time, people were taught this very paternalistic myth that that slaves were well taken care of, that they were treated with dignity, and that they were part of a family. Like there were people who used to for the longest time, and I think people still do this, people would go and have marriages at plantations that were like slave sites, like where slaves worked.
Yep.
And I think,
and yes, people do still do that.
Yes, and it's really, really weird. But at the same time, I think one of the things that we really haven't let go of is the fact that while we've challenged these ideas, the institutions of like maintaining like big memorials to people who were involved in slavery, or in the case of the Confederacy, fighting a war that killed over 500,000 people to preserve it, is still very much alive. The other thing I think is we've never really gone into, at least in my opinion, in the public discourse enough. We don't talk enough about pro-slavery thought and how it influenced American politics, particularly in the 19th century. There used to be a lot more harsher, like, oh, they're not Christians, therefore we can enslave them. Well, when they ended up becoming Christians inevitably because they were under the control of their enslavers, they had to find another excuse. And one of the things that they came up with was this paternalistic view that African Americans were incapable of taking care of themselves. They were being raised up in their enslavement, that it was best for them. And really what I look at, say, DeSantis's statement, the guidelines, which again, like, he can say that he wasn't the one who put it there, but he's the one who's supporting it and not like backing down on it. It's still his curriculum. He's the governor of Florida.
Right.
I see a very similar line of thought. It is very much a pro-slavery defense kind of argument. And I think it's a bit.
If you can argue in any way that slavery benefited the slaves, then you're open to slavery. You are open to it. Yeah.
And we saw this kind of thing with Matt Walsh as well. Like this paternalistic view that African Americans should be not necessarily grateful, but be willing to say slavery was necessary, which is just another way from them to cowardly say, like, yeah, that it was good, but I'm not going to call it good. That kind of thinking really does need to be addressed, because there seems to be this view that we owe historical figures complete deference to their prejudices rather than trying to understand them and criticize them. For example, you'll hear, like, ever since Elon bought up Twitter, you'll occasionally see lots of lost causers. A lot of them, like, will have old pictures of Confederates.
And the neo-Confederate assholes.
Yep. And one of the things they will accuse people being critical of the institution of slavery and those who partook in it, both from the perspective of the founders and the Confederacy itself, is that you are engaging in what they call presentism. And there is such a thing as presentism in the sense that, like, you don't want to 100% push present day ideas onto previous historical figures, because that will blind you to what they were thinking and how they would react. But at the same time, there is also a danger in being so historically, like, relativist that you deny the humanity of the people you're observing, particularly, which is why there's an ongoing debate actually among historians about whether or not to use the term enslaved people versus slaves.
What?
And yeah,
That's a debate.
yep. And the reason involving that is there's a question of, are we downplaying the severity of the condition that African Americans were in when they were enslaved by calling them enslaved people, versus are we invalidating the fact that they were people first and enslaved second? Both sides kind of have some points on it. It's more about understanding the humanity of African Americans at the time, but those kinds of conversations are important. But you wouldn't get that kind of thing from Ron DeSantis.
Oh, you won't get it from Ron DeSantis. But I gotta say, if there's anybody out there who hears somebody inaccurately talking about the slaves, and they get upset because you didn't say enslaved people, honestly, I'm just gonna slap the taste out your mouth. So usually, you should be fucking ashamed of yourself for being upset about that. And going back to presentism, fucking about not imbuing the past with the mores of today. I'm like, but even back then, people thought that shit was fucked. What are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Like, one of the Thomas Paine, famously one of the first to ever advocate for the independence of the United States, actually repeatedly called out his counterparts in the Revolution for engaging in slavery. He thought it was completely and utterly unacceptable. And his radicalism is actually pretty downplayed because he was a deist and he did not get along with churches. He believed there was a God, but he did not. He was known for kind of having difficulty with organized religion. But when it comes to this kind of view, I think what we have from right-wingers and really Americans who don't want to talk about this stuff in general is a discomfort with gauging the significance of this historical trauma. And the problem, obviously, with that is it happened. But also that there is something that I remember when I was in college, when I was getting my history degree, was a set of questions that my mentor always wanted us to always think about, like when we were writing or researching a subject. And it was, you ask who, what, when, where, why, and how significant. And how significant is perhaps one of the most important questions, because as much as we try to observe history from a neutral lens, the significance of the events and the people involved will always have significance to us as human beings. History is the story of us. And so long as you have things like bans on use of the 1619 Project, or trying to get people to argue that slaves benefited from their enslavement, you're not really going to accurately represent where humanity is, where people and Americans are today. And because, again, we always look to the past to understand ourselves.
Yeah, fucking, it's these people, man.
It's frustrating.
It is, like, the more you say it, and the more frustrating it is, because, like, I want to try to talk to these people, but it's like, at the same time, it's like, golly, there's so much to unpack.
Oh, and it's frustrating again. Like, and I know I don't want to repeat myself over and over, but
No, you're good. You're good.
This isn't just an issue in terms of we're talking just about like the dignity of enslaved people, or like how we understand historical trauma, although that is critical. It's also a danger because it represents an attack on professional history itself. I don't consider myself a professional historian. I used to refer to myself as a public historian because I really liked writing about how historical memory.
I like that name, public historian. I like
there's a whole actual separate faction of historians that are outside of academia. They're trained. They know how to use like primary sources and engage with historiography, but they do it in a way that makes it available to the public. But I also write a lot about controversies, politics. So I tend to describe myself more as a polemicist than a historian. But
Oh, big man over here, fucking polemicist.
it's funny because earlier before the stream, you said you don't like how everybody uses intellectual words
And
all the
I
time and then
because
excessively.
I know what those words mean. It's just it just annoys the shit out of me.
And then I go and pull that.
I'm like, yeah, I'm like, all right, you trying to get me to come down there and show you what for.
But no, I do think though, like, there is a serious problem with the professional advancement of history. The amount of people pursuing bachelor's in history degrees is declining. We have backlashes in Florida in particular against universities investigating and doing research on this kind of thing. And when I was at my alma mater at Loras College, we had a controversy about our founder, Bishop Matthias Loras. It was revealed to the public that he had owned a black woman by the name of Mary Louise.
Oh.
And there was a whole controversy about what to do with the statue, because there's this big statue of him waving to everybody who drove up to the main area of the college. And we had a pretty substantial black student body that was very active. And it was like very, very controversial. And yet, if we were in Ron DeSantis's area, there's a very good chance that the question of whether or not to be able to remove the statue would have been completely and utterly rejected.
Oh yeah, no, it would have been fuck you. You would probably end up in jail for trying. No,
like, I'm sure they pissed somebody off.
Oh yeah, under Ron DeSantis, that's not even a topic you'd be able to have, like, to discuss on a similar issue. And that's the real crux of this, right? It's like he's trying to force us to just not talk about these things, to not acknowledge these disparities, not talk about these disparities, not talk about our history, not really engage with. He's trying to force us not to. And I'm sorry, brother, you got a whole other thing coming, motherfucker. That's not how it's gonna go down. Or if that is how it's gonna go down, what's gonna result in is what's been recurring in a lot of red states is effectively a brain drain.
Yes.
In other words, all the people that know this shit, they're just gonna leave. Yeah. They're gonna get tired of Ron DeSantis' little fucking cronies cracking down on them. They're just gonna pack their bags and take a better offer somewhere else.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that's frustrating, because you'll have people who are, I'm up here in Illinois, and you'll have right wingers who say the state's going to hell, yada yada yada, and then they'll flee the state and they'll go to Florida and they'll say Florida is such a great state. There's none of this woke crap here. But then what ends up happening is you have people who are not really looking at universities as a way to educate themselves or to be better citizens and understanding the society in which they live. They're really just talking about it. They're looking at it as a job factory. And that's the other part of this. There is, unfortunately, I think, this attitude that if I get mine, what does it matter what you think about this past event? If I'm able to go to work, get my meal, go home, it doesn't, all this other stuff, it doesn't matter to me. And that's a problem. And I'm not really sure how to solve it. But what I do know is, at the very least, making sure that people have access to this information in spite of what Ron DeSantis is attempting to do is incredibly important.
All right. Fucking, I would say if you're looking for a solution, well, for one, in states like Florida, it's a little bit tougher because the Democrats kind of suck down there.
Yeah.
So it's gonna kind of come down to like the local level. Like Benjamin Dixon actually talked. I want to talk to him about this. He says a lot of what people do, is like it's typically the churches and school groups outside of the school, right-wing school board and shit, that come together on this and push back at the local level. I know Ron DeSantis is being sued by multiple parties on all this bullshit. And there are ways to fight back, even without the Democratic Party. You just got to do so at the local level. You got to keep the pressure on, because all this shit is grossly unconstitutional.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing about Ron DeSantis. That's my favorite thing about him. Like, at first, I thought he was a genuine threat, But then you find out not a goddamn thing of that he's pushed for or done holds up in court. None of it. Yeah, it's done damage initially, like in the offset, but that damage will take a while to undo. I want to be clear about that. But everything he's done is so grossly unconstitutional that even his Trump-controlled courts, his personally appointed courts and shit, fuck, even Chris Rufo came out and said, yeah, this shit kind of fucking went too far.
Yeah. And it's also really worth noting again and again that this approach to like cracking down on the historiographic debates that occur among historians, that is just beyond what they're willing, is not beyond like what else they're willing to do, because they love, and you know this is because you've always ranted about free speech absolutists, is they love to rant and scream about how they're free speech absolutists, how they're protecting free speech and ending, and then they'll also go on the other hand and say, well, I'm stopping indoctrination. But the thing is, if you don't allow people to like have historical thought evolve over time based on new evidence, based on new arguments, based on new methods, you're never going to see an improvement in our understanding of history. And that's exactly what they want. They want a set point where they can say 1776, Civil War, civil rights, everything's good now. Like it's very much a reductionist approach for the sake of their own
Wait, can you go do that now?
Own politics.
Thank you. Yeah, you should do that first. All right, sorry, that was some wife, something about the car. Yeah, good news though. It's good news. But yeah, it's and the thing is, what I don't understand is like, what do they really gain from that? Because like, okay, we're talking broadly speaking with a civilization. All we really need as a civilization are workers, taxpayers, and consumers. That's all we need. And anything everything else is honestly just, whatever the fuck we feel like. You know what I mean? Just whatever we feel like it's worth learning about, whatever we feel like is worth knowing. But then you get this shit where it's like, that's what I mean. It's like, it doesn't hurt to learn the truth because it doesn't take away from the three main things society needs to function. But for some reason, they're like incredibly committed to hiding the truth, from never talking about it, from never acknowledging it, in a way that just draws bad attention to them. You know what I mean? It makes no fucking sense because none of their arguments hold up to scrutiny. Their version of history is absolute fucking nonsense. And it's just like, why though, dude? You gain nothing from this. I don't understand it.
I think, and this is just my subjective opinion here, I don't know for certain, and I don't have any data on my side to back this up, but this is just my observation. I think they think that if they I'm just using DeSantis as an example, are triggering the libs, or if they're making their political opponents angry in some capacity, that itself is a sign that you're doing something that'll give you something to work with. Even though it's been proven to be a total disaster on the electoral front, they performed horribly during the midterms. That was an embarrassing show for an opposition party.
Yep.
But it's still something that they go with. So if you have somebody like, say, Kevin M. Cruz, who's writes about racism and the role it played in the establishment of suburbia in the United States in his book White Flight, or if you talk about or have somebody like Barbara Ransby talk about how the civil rights movement was actually more radical and more decentralized in the case of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and tries to explain all the nuances to them, they're convinced that because somebody is trying to correct them, they must be in the right. And to be clear, there are examples of people doing work for good purposes to try and look at the past where there are problems. I mentioned the 1619 Project. It is mostly not written by historians. Most of it is like written by journalists. I think Kevin M. Cruz is the only one who is actually an Americanist. I may be wrong on that. But at the same time, it was still seen as invaluable because academia does, to some extent, remains separate from the public. There is an issue, which is why there's a whole public historian section of the historical tradition, and they don't really want to engage with the flaws because or ways we could fix those flaws. They want to use those flaws as a bludgeoning tool, and it's really
It's
not
not.
something that's going to go well for anybody.
Of course not. It's not just a bludgeoning tool. By the way, I'm starting to wake up. Thank God. I'm sure you've noticed this whole time I've been basically in and out of sleep while we've been talking.
You're good. You're good.
And I am so sorry for that, truly. But my eyes are starting to get clearer. I'm like, okay, I'm waking up. Thank God. But it's not just a bludgeoning tool that they do. It's they don't like the real history because they feel like the real history makes them look bad. You know what I mean? When you really reckon with who are the bad guys throughout history and whatnot, it ain't been your fucking hippy dippy liberals. It's been your staunch ultra conservatives. You know, it's been your fucking diehard nationalists. You know what I mean? Your religious leaders, this, that, and the third. Basically, people who, by and large, lean right. You know what I mean? And when you acknowledge that, when you are aware of that, well, it makes it a lot harder to justify your ideology when you guys been the bad guys pretty much all throughout history. You know what I mean? So they rather just give themselves a clean slate, essentially, and rewrite and say things weren't as bad as they actually were, as the libs say they were, and we weren't really the bad guys. It's kind of hard to say. They want to muddy the if not outright exonerate themselves, they at least want to muddy the waters so they make pretend like shit's still up for debate. And I would say the prime example of someone who's like on the full exoneration side, you get people like Matt Walsh, who straight up said it's great and proper and awesome. Those men were heroes, the conquerors who founded America and they did what they did to the Native Americans and to the slaves and such. He 100% defends all of it. You know what I mean? Says it was right and proper, and we wouldn't have America if none of that had happened. And then you got people all over the rest of the spectrum that are like, you know, it's hard to say, you know, but the North invaded the South for bullshit reasons. Lincoln didn't actually care about the slaves, blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? They try to act like there's a debate where there is none.
I will say, like, I generally agree with what you're saying. I will say, though, that there have been points in history where liberals have been insufficient.
Then let me rephrase it. I would say there's a distinction between insufficient, like just insufficiently supportive, insufficiently helpful, do some bullshit liberal did shit. But I mean, when I'm saying done the evil, but like been flat out the bad guy.
Yeah,
is what I mean. You know what I mean? Just you're not finding those hippy dippy liberals being the ones in the lynch mobs. You know what I mean? That's now I'm obviously not saying 100% that thing. Maybe there was some hippy dippy liberal fucking doing the lynch mobs. Maybe but I generally I think it's safe to say that was not the case.
Yeah, and what I was kind of referring to is there have been incidents for example during the Civil War, after the Civil War, and during the Civil Rights Movement, where the momentum kind of shifted among liberals. Particularly, the example of this would be in 1877, where there was the compromise of 1877, where the Republican Party at the time made an agreement with the Democrats, essentially to like say we'll withdraw most of the troops that are were defending African American rights. In order to secure the presidency for Rutherford B. Hayes. And that was something that it was done by a Northern liberal sectional party. We also saw but at the same time, you could have that conversation if we were willing to be able to
actually talk about it, we're actually honestly engaging with the past. We could do that.
Yeah,
but he doesn't want to do that.
And I when I was still writing primarily on Medium, I still republish my stuff on there. So if any of you are interested, go check that out or check out my newsletter. But if we were to like have a conversation about, say, the way in which different groups of people have reacted to civil rights, it's always going to have some issues where there's going to be a reaction. And because a lot of times, some of the people who were involved in the backlashes, some of them are still alive today. And some of their victims are still alive today, particularly in Tulsa. There's still stuff in the courts.
I love that personally. I love thinking about that the people who led the charge against desegregation and all that jazz, they are still here. The people who assaulted people, the people who are politely guilty of murdering people outright, they're all still here, and there was no accountability for any of them.
Yeah, and like just to put this into kind of perspective with the timeline, there was a point where Harriet Tubman was alive at the same time as Ronald Reagan. He was a child at the time, like very, very young, but she managed to survive into the 20th century, and it was one of those things where a lot of what we're talking about seems like a long time ago because it's 100 years ago, 200 years ago, so on. But the thing is, like, that is a very like short amount of time historically speaking. You've got countries.
If there's one thing, just on the side, it's one thing. If there's one thing that I've learned is that the way history is taught or framed, they kind of make it seem like this shit was like it's an extremely long time ago. When I'm like, a lot of this shit was just 60 years ago, basically in a lot of people's lifetime.
Yeah, and this is the thing that's always been kind of why it's so important to keep asking the question, not only who, what, when, where, or why, but why significant. Because if we're looking at it like from a perspective of like many years ago in a far away land or whatever, like if we're talking about it like that, you start to lose the humanity behind it. And this is why it's especially dangerous with what Ron DeSantis also said, their curriculum said about political violence in race riots, where he made it sound like, and I say he because he still signed off on this. So if any pedantic people come at me and say, well, he didn't write this piece of this curriculum, he had other people do it. I'm like, he still gave the orders. He's still using taxpayer money to do it.
Yeah,
it's his thing. That they were comparing, they're saying that they should be instructed about racial violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. And that to me is an incredibly, this flies in the face of the question of why significant, why history has to ask that question. Because if you treat all political violence in any capacity as always the same, you're going to end up justifying a lot of horrible stuff. Like slave revolts are not equivalent to mass lynchings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Frederick Douglass beating the crap out of his former master is not equivalent to the slave catchers trying to catch him, or him having to flee to the United Kingdom because people were trying to come after abolitionists after John Brown was killed. It's not It's not the same, and they know that. They know that. But they play this game and say, well, it's technically true that African Americans engaged in this kind of violence. I'm like, yeah, because they were being killed. It's like, this is where, again, it gets back to this idea of sanitizing things. Yeah. And that to me is especially annoying. Because like, as much as I'm not a big fan of like the discussion on political violence and like in what you see online, like should we steal, should we riot, like those questions are rarely ever handled with the nuance that is necessary. Mostly because violence is so horrible. But like the idea of like we're going to be talking about racial violence like in the past as if they're all the same, absolutely unacceptable.
Fucking again, is and the reason I talked about this a while back with somebody else. I think it was Beautiful Maeve. Fucking the reason they do this, I think more than anything, is that if they actually reckoned with the past, like really, truly reckon with this shit, it would undermine their own credibility. It would undermine the wealth they've accumulated. It would undermine everything. And they don't want that. They really don't. Because if any of them actually looked at history, if hell of their own families, and to ask the question that, of course, they haven't been interested in asking, but ask the question, how come we're rich? You know, how did we get rich while everyone else is so poor? And then you look into your fucking family history, and Oh God, your family been exploiting people for cheap fucking labor for so long. Hired the fucking Pinkertons when they try to go on strikes and get killed their own workers and blah blah fucking blah. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, see, I don't want to know that because that means my family is bad, and that means my wealthy existence is unjust. It's immoral. And again, seeing as everyone is a hero in their own stories, well, they gotta fucking erase the part that undermines that narrative that they tell themselves.
I also have to say, like, just reflecting on that, with when it comes to the issue of people not being comfortable with their history, especially if when it shows that their wealth came from like the exploitation of other people.
Yeah.
There's a I forget what show it was, but Anderson Cooper really did this thing where they actually went into his family history and his records.
Yep. Found out his father was a slave, or
His
not,
great great grandfather.
his great great grandfather was a slave owner, and the slave owner, and one of his slaves beat him to death with a shovel, I think.
It was a garden hose. I
With a
think it
garden
was.
hose, yeah, beat him to. And Anderson Cooper said he was glad that happened. He
Yeah,
deserved it.
and compare that to how Ben Affleck responded when he found out something that he had an ancestor who was involved in enslavement. He actually put some considerable resources to cover that up. And like it's really that
Yeah,
distinction is the perfect encapsulation of what we're seeing here with Ron DeSantis and a lot of the people talking about the institution of slavery and the horror that occurred um, at the time, and really didn't really end post the 13th Amendment because of, again, sharecropping. A lot of they might not have been like in the same capacity, but they were still like at the behest of their former masters in a lot of cases. Not
oh
all,
yeah,
but that was a reality. I remember one of the things that really kind of drove this point home to me was there was a show. I don't know if you've ever heard of Checkmate Lincolnites.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I know them. I
yeah,
love their show. Good people.
good stuff. Well, one of the things they ended up finding was a recording of a former slave talking about how she was beaten. She witnessed people being beaten, how she was beaten, and in some pretty graphic detail. And once you start to hear the voices of these people, not just like their names on a piece of paper, it becomes much more human. It becomes much more real. And it makes what Ron DeSantis and all these other right wingers are doing completely and utterly disgusting. And I know maybe I'm engaging in a little bit of presentism, but you know what? I don't care at this point when it comes to the level of humanity here. There is a point in which historical relativism has to stop and the dignity of the people you are talking about begins.
Yeah,
Because,
nah, these aren't abstract concepts. These are real fucking people.
yeah,
And trying to sanitize your own image by downplaying, dismissing, or defending the atrocity committed against actual human beings or just outright trying to fucking lie and say that these human beings that they actually benefited from the horror that they experienced. It wasn't that bad. They actually benefited from it. Yeah, there's something deeply fucking sick about that.
and I would also say, like, I just want to bring up a personal anecdote. When I was visiting, when I was down in Nashville, I was on vacation with family, and I went and saw Andrew Jackson's home. I went to his home and I got a tour of the place, and it's beautiful. But the underlying reality is people were forced to like live here against their will and die there. And there was a really good example of this, which is Andrew Jackson and his wife's grave. Right next to this big mausoleum dedicated to the enslavers, there's another grave, and it refers to a former an enslaved man by the name of what they referred to as Uncle Alfred, and it's a little tiny stone in the dirt with a bunch of flowers around it. But he kept maintaining this place even after Andrew Jackson died, even after he was emancipated. He contributed to that place more than Andrew Jackson did, in my opinion. And yet his memory is shown even in the paternalistic twisted thinking that they had that they were honoring him is still seen as secondary to the majesty of Andrew Jackson who enslaved him. That is the distinction that needs to be had as well. That the way that supposed love for their slaves is talked about also portrays a fundamental racial
Paternalism,
dis
yeah.
yeah, but paternalism.
Racial paternalism. We were pets to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the same way you look at your dog or your cat. You know what I mean? Is how they looked at us. You know, we're their pets. We like, and they can't take care of themselves. They can't survive without us. You know what I mean? They need us. They need this. This is good for them, type of shit. And yeah, no, I'm good. That shit's fucking sick. Oh, but on that note, this is why from the same people we talked about, you know, the something Lincolnites. I forgot you just said it was
Checkmate
called.
Lincolnites.
Checkmate Lincolnites. There we go. Um, I love the little tidbit I learned from them about how many slave owners, when the Union rolled up, um, and the slaves, you know, left their masters, escaped from their masters to join the Union. Many slave owners were heartbroken, confused, genuinely thought, "What? I thought they were. I thought we were family. I thought you loved me. What? Why did you leave?" You know, like they really, truly did not understand what they were doing to people. They genuinely believed in their own paternalism.
Oh yeah, and that segment was based off of Kevin Levin's Searching for Black Confederates, which was basically a
Yes,
debunking of the narrative that there were black people who willingly fought for the Confederacy.
bro, you
No,
got a way
they were
better.
camp slaves.
You got a way better memory than me. Holy shit!
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But keep going.
I read that book in college, and it was super nice to see that actually being used in a very well established show. And it's one of the reasons I also think that like media, like what we're doing right now, is so important. Even if it's not done in a scholarly manner, it can still be very useful to get it out to people.
Yeah,
But to also get to the paternalism, the racial paternalism that I mentioned earlier, I think the other issue here is some of these people are also looking to create an idea that they're not like that they're countering the victim narrative surrounding slavery,
ugh,
and like that they want to represent African Americans in their own right under when they were enslaved. And I will say it is important that we don't just portray African Americans who were enslaved as weak. They weren't. They broke their tools. They ran away. Sometimes they killed their masters if given the opportunity. Um,
yep,
but the thing is, if in pursuit of that goal, you end up playing into the pro-slavery defense, which there was a whole school of thought on that for a very long time before the Civil War, then I think you've made a horrible error, even with good intentions. Um, the other issue I think that needs to be kind of addressed here is the fact that there has been an underlying anti-intellectualism among the right ever since the 60s, ever since the student movements really popped up. I think there's been this attitude towards universities as hotbeds of radicalism and politics that don't fit with the nice white fence, American flag, tea on the porch kind of view of America. And so a lot of times they look at any challenges or difficulties that come from that, whether it be intellectual or in the case of student loan debt forgiveness, as a burden. And that's so they want to shut it down. They don't want a network of people who are educated, who are aware, who have the means to go look at these things for themselves. They want the orthodox view of American history pre 1960 to be like the mainstream.
yep. Fucking. That's why it's baffling to me when I see these right wing or so many right wingers be like, you know, why is there so few Republicans in college universities? Well, I'm like, well, maybe if y'all hadn't made colleges out to be persona non grata for fucking decades, there'd be more of you there. They assume it's all just indoctrination, but I'm like, dog, y'all have been railing against public schools and universities for decades.
Yeah.
This is the logical conclusion of that.
Yeah, and I will also say, like, I have interviewed conservative professors before. Like, I had Dr. Christopher Budzitz. He leans, in my opinion, a little more conservative. He's a constitutional scholar. He's come on my show to talk not only about any number of things like the impeachment, the first impeachment proceeding, and then the war in Ukraine, because he's been to Ukraine. He's had friends. He has friends there. I hope they're okay. Um,
Yeah.
but that he's never given off the impression to me that he wasn't willing to have a conversation, because to him, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, this is just kind of where I look at it. He sees the intellectual rigor of like working and talking with liberals, with leftists, with other people as something that can be educational. And really, I think the more we hear people like talking about why there's not as many conservatives in universities, I really do think it's partially because there's a percentage of the people on the right who really don't seem to see the value of universities outside of a job producer. And we need to stop thinking of education, and really, especially historical education, as just a waste of money. Universities are not here to make you a big job producer. Well, that is a part of it. They're there to make good citizens. They're there to make us more effective at maintaining the society and improving it, so that we can continue to thrive and be better people.
Yeah. I talked about this actually with Beautiful Maeve too. Actually, it's because it comes down to like inherent / intrinsic value, right? The value of something outside, if it's not any kind of monetary gain or loss you can get from it, right? It's just we value this because we believe it is good and right and healthy and such. It's just good for our society as a whole to do this, to do these things, to study these things, to make these things available, to have these conversations, this, that, and the third. Unfortunately, even among liberals, unfortunately, a lot of this shit is lacking. That a lot of value in those things is lacking. It really is. Because I'm sure there are plenty of rich liberals and whatnot that could invest in the arts and keep this shit going. They could invest in the social sciences and yada yada and history departments and such. They could. I'm sure there's plenty of rich people that can do that too. But rich liberals that can do that too. But the problem is, not a lot of people care.
Yeah, and I will just say it's kind of ironic that a lot of conservatives seem to, and if there's a conservative who sees this and disagrees with me, by all means, respond in my comment section, because I'll see it. I see all the comments that seem to be like upholding American tradition by taking a crap on universities. But Thomas Jefferson, obviously a slaver, but he was also very big into education, and he's very big on intellectual inquiry. He had, and a lot of it's still been preserved, a whole library. He was reading multiple different philosophers and thinkers to the point where it influenced his perspective. John Adams, in his thoughts on government, one of the first things he does is list off all the people he was reading and defending them from people who said they were too pedestrian, to show off how intellectual he was. So some of this anti-intellectualism is ironically very un-American.
We're supposed to be way better than this. But now, even a lot of people just expect Americans expect Americans to be dumb as shit. So it's disappointing, honestly.
And I mean, like, I will just say, and I'm pretty much made most of the points that I wanted to make. But I think it's really frustrating when it comes to the universities, because universities are public institutions for the most part. They're incredibly important, that require us to keep an eye on how things are going, what we can afford to like have available. Like, I believe it was the History News Network, which is like a free like news site about evolving like scholarly stuff that isn't like published in a journal. It's actually very available. It was supported by a university, and I think they ran out of funding, and the university just decided to stop doing that. And that is just as bad as the death of local newspapers. People need to be able to find resources, otherwise you're going to have conspiracism, which is constantly spreading.
The people who got the money, like that, and that's what's so fucked, right? The people who care the most, who will funnel as much money as absolutely fucking necessary, are the worst fucking people alive.
Yep.
Like, it's the conspiracy theorists and culture warlords, this, that, and the third. Oh, they will fund every local news outlet. They'll fund every fucking school department. They'll fund this, that, and the third, everything, provided you do it in their way, of course. Provided you spread our conspiracies, provided you push our conservative agenda and such. And that's my frustration not even with them, but with more liberal central to central left to liberally fucking rich people. I'm like, what the fuck are y'all doing? Like, y'all can't just let Dolly Parton be the only one out here fucking doing shit for people. Where are the rest of y'all?
Yeah.
The Clinton Foundation or some shit. Like, somebody, y'all got money. Start funding this shit.
Yeah, and just kind of to finish up on my end, I think what we really need to start talking about and really start doing, because there's always a lot of talking, Lord knows I can talk forever, is this view that, if we just point out that the conservatives are doing something wrong, it'll get better.
It'll
But like I
solve
said,
it'll solve itself type of shit. Yeah.
Yes. And the problem is, and I mentioned this earlier in the discussion, the conservatives find value in validation in the fact that they're being called out. They see it as like they'll say the woke mob has come for me. I guarantee you in my next video there's gonna be some like instance where like the person I'm going after, I'll say it, it's Kevin Ferris. If I guarantee you there's gonna be some commenters who are going to view that as like me being part of the woke mob rather than me having a criticism of his coverage. That validation is what leads them, guides them.
Yeah, and but I'll say the same thing you said, basically, that y'all got some shit to say. We both open to talking about it. Connor and I, we ain't afraid to talk about anything. Y'all want to hash this shit out? We can hash this shit out live or in private. We don't give a fuck. We'll do it. The invitation's always open. But that said, yeah, it's been about an hour. You got everything you wanted to say out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really glad to come on.
Hey, brother, you're always welcome. I apologize for me being half asleep for the first half.
You're good.
I don't know why. I canceled my 3:00 show because I was just too tired. I had him rescheduled to fucking Monday. So I was thinking of calling you to reschedule as well. I was like, because I took a nap, woke up, and I'm still fucking tired.
I hate that. I hate that.
I was like, fuck, I'm still tired. Shit. Do I cancel? What do I do? But yeah, I was like, you know what? No, I'm not doing that to Connor. That other guy, whatever, but I'm not doing that to Connor. So I was like, all right, I'll tough it out. And that's why I was fucking bobbing for cock the fucking first half, just like,
yeah.
No
studio problems this time.
No studio problem, no technical difficulties. Oh wait, now I remember what the technical difficulties were last time. I had to take a I
was waiting for you guys. I was like, does he remember the joke?
I was half asleep last time, or I was half asleep while you were saying that to me. That's why I didn't click. Now I'm awake, and now it just hit me. Fuck you. Oh yeah, no technical difficulties. Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, it hit me like that hit my colon like a fucking truck. Oh, that was bad.
For those who don't know what happened, I will be more than happy to link the interview I did with Rico.
Those years ago.
Yeah, and I will also link some of the material I was referring to in his comments and mine. Just because I think my 1619 essay was pretty good. I really liked it. B, I also just think everybody should be able to look at this stuff and see it for what it is.
All right. Then definitely link your work in the comments below. So anybody who finds this video going later down the road in the future, listen to everything that's been said. They'll know to just go to the comments, see everything you put, and they'll be able to look your shit up.
Yep, I'll set up a citation form.
Attaboy, you fucking killing it, you academic fuck. You know your shit, dog. Every time I talk to you, one thing you never fail to impress me with how much you know. And bro, I wish you the world of success and shit.
Thank you very much, and the same to you.
Man, I'm just some chain smoking dumbass. I don't put in half the amount of work you put in. The only thing I'm good at is people like talking to me. That's it. You know what I mean?
It works.
It works. But I will make sure that when a motherfucker want to get to the nitty gritty and the details and shit, I'm gonna tell motherfucker straight up, I ain't your boy to talk to. But my boy Connor here, Connor Kelly, he can go in depth with you on this shit. So let me refer you to him if you want to get into the nitty gritty. And like, that's because the details ain't my specialty at all.
Yeah, I remember you said something about to me about that when I did the Midwestern Marks video.
Yeah,
That one,
I don't.
I'm proud of that one. Really proud of that
Yeah,
one.
you are really good. You when it comes to fucking details and remembering fucking every last bit of them, you shine. That's where you shine.
Thank you.
So and then stringing it all together coherently, that is also a fucking things like. You see my interview with Joe Lewis?
A little bit.
Yeah. Joe Lewis is the kind of academic I hate. You are the kind of academic I love. The dichotomy between y'all is that you make your point, you get to the fucking point for one. You're not overly wordy, and the words you choose to use are not so fucking esoteric and just impossible to decipher that I would need a fucking encyclopedia to look up just to understand one sentence of what you said.
You'd
You know what I mean?
you'd hate reading Hegel. It's all that.
I hate that shit. I hate academic motherfuckers who are so clearly in love with their academic knowledge and the words big thinky words they've learned. I hate them.
There is actually kind of a joke among historians that like some historians are great with finding information, but they're terrible writers for general audience because they're writing in historiography terms. And that can happen, but I try to keep it as simple as I can.
Thank you. Please, God, Connor, I cannot stress enough how good that is that you're doing that. Keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, I got to get going, but it was a pleasure to see you and talk to you again, and I look forward to doing this more in the future. If you you have some pretty impressive guests, if you wouldn't mind recommending me, I'd love to talk to them.
Oh, I will. Matter of fact, you know what? Going forward, I'll start doing that too because I've had Contraband Wagon.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's asked the same thing of me where he was just like, "Hey, can you patch me over to?" Basically, I do want to create that kind of network, right, where we're all talking to each other. You know what I mean? Because that's the only thing I'm good at is networking. I did it for Caitlin, the one chick I was talking to a couple days ago. I connected her with Date Psych. I connected Contraband with Benjamin Dixon. I will gladly connect you with whoever you want to talk to. Like if you just we need to be having these conversations. We need to be connecting with each other. We need to all know each other and be able to vouch for each other and shit. So I'm gonna start doing that. Thank you. I will start referring people to you.
My pleasure.
All right, brother. You have a good night. All right.
You too.
Peace.
Peace.